What's happening, everyone? Thank you so much for joining us on another Adventure Box podcast. So great to have you here. Today we're going to be talking about immigration. As this month has been basically on the melting pot, we are actually going to be talking melting pot when it comes to the United States and all the people coming in to the United States. We're going to be talking about immigration. It's the last chapter or last section of our melting pot unit. And then we're going to be moving on to, I think, the War of, the War of 1812. So stay tuned for more. Okay, on the War of 1812. That will be next week. We'll go into that. As of right now, we're going to go into immigration when it comes to into the United States. Okay, so there's a lot to talk about. Let's go through just a few things. I'll hit the few points that we're going to be talking about, and then we're going to go through the unit itself. This one might be a little bit shorter. Tomorrow is going to be, today's Monday. Wednesday will be a little bit longer because we're going to be talking about basically immigration in the early 1800s or around that time. This is basically like factory work and stuff like that. A lot of the stuff we're going over today, we've already gone over because we've been talking about immigration coming in or people coming in from Europe trying to settle because of religious persecution, those type of things. But today's episode, we're going to look back through it's always been part of the American story, immigration. While much of attention is given to the ways of immigration, basically in the 19th to the 20th century, Americans have been people have been coming in to America over many generations before that, centuries before that. Early 1600s and 1700s. That's what we're going to be talking about today. The early waves of immigration, who came here, why did they come here, how did they get here? We're going to talk about that. The second part we're going to be talking about is how immigration was regulated before 1840, because things started to really change in the 1840s, and that's what we're going to be focusing on Wednesday. So this is a story of hope, hardship, and ongoing tension between welcome newcomers and those that define themselves as Americans. So, and as you can see, we still have that issue today. So let's go into it. Let's start talking about the first part, the early wave of immigration. This is, again, what we've already talked about months back when we talked about, not Age of Exploration, though that was part of it, but colonial life. Again, that was like 3 months ago. So between the 1600s and early 1800s, hundreds of thousands of people crossed the Atlantic to settle in what would become the United States. Now, we're setting it at 1840 because that is when a lot of the immigration rules started to come into play. When there was actually immigration rules, you can read a lot of it in our book or in our textbook for the melting pot, or going all the way back to colonial life a few months ago. That was our third early American textbook. But what we're going to be talking about is, let's talk about the English. The English had settlers that settled in Virginia, New England, and also some of the southern colonies. So they basically spread out. And again, why? Because these were British colonies. Whether they were Dutch at some point and then became British, or they were Spanish and then became British, or if they were French and became British. The English basically settled the whole map. Then there was the Scottish. Well, Scots, and Irish. The Protestant dissenters from Northern Ireland, who settled primarily in the Appalachian back country. So, funny enough, my family, partial of my family, came from Ireland, and from Ireland we came over in actually the Mayflower. So we were actually way before everyone else. And then we settled, actually I've got a picture of this, we settled on the east end of Long Island, down here in this area. Now my ancestors settled here and slowly moved out until we have like this little teensy weensy little fish farm in one piece of property that we have there. And we keep it because it has heritage to do with us. We could sell it, but we don't want to. We want to keep the heritage down there, which is, again, part of our history. So let's talk about, so we had the Scottish and the Irish who came in, and they came down to when they came in, they tried to settle down in the Appalachians, the backcountry. And this is like about the early 1800s. Those before that were staying very close to the coast because the coast is where all of the commerce came from, all the people came from. Now you had the Germans, also known as the what? Pennsylvania Dutch. So the Pennsylvania Dutch settled in here over in Pennsylvania. So this was also, many settlers that came to Pennsylvania actually drew in because of religious reasons. And most of them actually, so he said the Scottish and Irish, Protestant dissenters. Yep, they came over. A lot of those that came up into New England, the Mayflower, were dissenters from religious denominations. Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, they all moved over because they were being persecuted. Others included Dutch, Swedes, the French Huguenots, and also a small number of Jewish and Africans. Mostly Africans, we already talked about them in the first section. Most of those were enslaved. There's not many that came over on their own volition. But we did have a lot of Jews coming over as well. Now, this early immigration was not centrally managed. It was driven by religious groups. So you have a group that you want to actually travel over, you travel together. Remember when we talked about religious denominations, like new ones in the United States? Actually, there was a big part of those from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a large population from England decided all at the same time to say, hey, let's move over, and they bought tickets together, and then because of all the persecution, they all traveled to Utah together. But they came as a group, which is where a lot of these people came from. You had the Quakers came over, the Puritans came over, all in groups. So that's why most of these were through religious groups, joint stock companies. So you actually had companies, we already talked about this, during colonial life, they owned large plots of land, and they tried to get people over to settle their colony, their area. But you also had land deeds. You had colonial land deeds, and that drove a lot of people there as well. So there's a lot of different reasons why people came over. There's something called the push and pull factors. These are basically what pushes you to do something or pulls you to do something. Pushing is usually against your will. Pulling is more of what you want to do. You're going to pull towards it. Now, some of the things, and this talks about like why they come. Some of the push was hardship, which especially next on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about a lot of that. Others had pulling basically opportunities. So let's talk about some of the push factors. The push factors, religious persecution, number one. Out of all the groups that came over to the United States, the push factor that was number one was the religious persecution, where there was the Puritans fleeing the Anglican Church, the Quakers escaping the hostilities of the English. All of these were all push factors. What other ones? Economics. Economic hardship would push you to leave Europe. Poverty, leave Europe. Lack of land, leave Europe. Because you're coming here for opportunities, which is actually the pull. But the push is the fact that you could not survive in Europe anymore. And the last one, the last of the three main ones, political oppression. So whether it was war, taxes, a lack of representation, sounds familiar. Taxation without representation, yeah. Just like this. These were all pushing people out of Europe and other places. You had people coming over from China. You had people coming over from Africa. Not as much in Africa for pulling opportunities, more of pushing opportunities, including slavery. All right, what were some of the pull factors? So what's going to pull you in? What kind of opportunities are going to pull you in? Well, if religious persecution is number one, then religious freedom is going to be your first pull factor. Number one pull factor, religious freedom. I'm going to pull in, I'm going to do the effort, and somebody else pushing me out, I'm going to do the effort to have religious freedom. Another one, cheap and free land. If I knew that there was free land, even now, where I could settle 20 acres or something, I might just leave, sell my house here, and go to it. I would love to own 20 acres of land. It doesn't work that way anymore. But these people, they saw the opportunity, and so they moved. What were some of those ones? Economic opportunity. Again, if the second one is economic hardship, then the second or third of the poles would be economic opportunity. There's a lot of agriculture, trade. Later on, it would be factories. These are all things that are opportunities, and so you want to leave Europe to go chase down those opportunities. Now, here's another one that was it's interesting. Would you think this is a pull or a push? It's called indentured servitude. Think about it. Would that pull you to the United States, or would that push you? So a common route for poorer immigrants, they worked for years in exchange for passage on ships. So is someone pushing you to do it? No. Indentured servitude, most of the time, not all the time, most of the time was actually poor immigrants doing that. If you were in debt, that was a push. They were sending you over to the Americas. If you were a criminal, they were pushing you to go into the Americas. But if you wanted to go over for any of those others, religious freedom, cheap land or free land, economic opportunities, then you would accept indentured servitude so that you can get to the United States. And someone's going to pay your way. And when you get there, you're going to work for them for 7 years, and then you're free. And so is all your family, especially if you have kids. 7 years in their early stage, it's just going to help them shape them. And then after those 7 years, they're free for the rest of their lives. So a lot of people said, that is worth it. Let's go. You got to think about today. Okay, so we have immigrants that come over the border, whether it's from Canada, whether it's from Mexico, or over the sea. They come in because of these push and pull opportunities. What's pushing them? Let's see, religious persecution, economic hardship. What was the third one? Third one, oh yeah, political oppression. Holy cow, those still are today the reasons why people try to do immigration. Now, the problem is that now there's rules in place. So the difference between those that are coming over from Europe and those that are coming from Mexico, if you don't do it the proper way, the legal way, then you're breaking the law. If you're breaking the law, you are known as what's called an illegal immigrant. So if you can find a way to come to the United States legally, there you go. It's free and clear. Well, free as it takes a while, but it's free and clear. You have to wait your turn. I have so many friends that have come over. I used to work in construction. So I had a lot of friends that would come over to the United States from Mexico, and they'd either have a work visa or they would get their immigration status. Now, I had some that were actually born in the United States. Well, one, I should say, fell in love with a girl down in Mexico because she was a family friend from their parents' earlier time there. And he worked in Kansas City because he loved her, but she would not cross over because it would be against the law. They did not want to break the law. So she was down in, I don't want to give the wrong name, but it's a border city on the Mexico side. And he actually at one point moved from Kansas City down there right before they got married. Then they got married, put in her papers to have her come over, but is probably still waiting. I haven't asked him in about a year because we lost touch. I got out of construction. The last time I talked to him was about a year ago, and he was still working on getting her legal status in the United States. Good for him. Back then, in the 16th and 1700s, there was no question there. There was no laws set up for it. And so people came and went as they saw freely if they could afford the payment to come over the ocean. So that's some of the reasons. For many Americans, it wasn't just a fresh start. It was the last chance. Again, the push factor. Okay, so where did they settle and what did they contribute? Okay, so let's take a quick tour of early American settlements and the legacies that they left behind. First off, I want to show you, sadly the only picture I have this time, but this is an immigrant ship. This is an immigrant, ooh, what did I do? What did I do? There you go. Zoom it back out. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, here we go. This is an immigrant ship. Back around late 1700s to early 1800s. It's a steamer. So immigrants would come off the ship. They would basically have everything they could carry being the only things that they owned, because they got rid of everything before they came over. They couldn't bring over a lot. And so these people had a lot of hardships, especially coming off the ships. They didn't know anything about this new land. They may have family that came over, but maybe they wouldn't be able to meet up with them. So it was very hard for them to figure out where to go. And so they did have houses for some of them to stay, but there's so many that came off these ships that there wasn't enough places to house them. You had women, children, men, everyone came in, and there's so many of them. So they came in. The reason why I had New York up actually is because one of the biggest areas was actually New York Harbor. So one of the biggest places where they actually had immigrants coming in. Now, let's talk about 1600s to 1700s. Well, you know what? Let's go back and recap what happened. So we had the founding of Jamestown, 1607. Then we had Plymouth, 1620. Dominated, basically the English dominated New England, which is why they call it New England, and the Chesapeake Bay. So they brought English law, Protestantism, so Protestant religion, and representative assemblies, law. Well, I said English law, but some way of governing, a representative body that would come over. That's some of the contributions that came from the English. What about the Germans? They had settled in Plymouth. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go back to this image. Okay. So they settled in Pennsylvania in the 1700s, created tight-knit farming communities. The Germans were big in farming. Whether it was them in Germany or them in the United States, they loved to farm. They had that ability and did a great job. They were also known as great craftsmen. They created barns and other architecture. You ever heard of the Amish? Yeah, so the Amish are great craftsmen, and they still do most of their work without any power tools or, well, I was going to say manufactured tools, but now they've actually gone a little bit away from that, and they do actually allow for manufactured tools. Okay, Scottish and Irish. This was another great part of those that came over, especially those in Ireland under persecution. They came over. Now, as I said before, they settled mostly in the Appalachian backcountry, and this is the early 1700s. They were known for their rugged independence, Scottish and Irish. I don't think you could think of a Scottish or Irish person without thinking of their rugged independence and their frontier skills. Plus, they were strong Presbyterian, well, they had strong Presbyterian traditions. What about the French Huguenots? Okay, the Huguenots, the Protestant refugees who brought artisans skills. So, artisan skills, glassmaking, any type of artistry or manufactured goods that were not made in the factory, because there was no factories at the time. They were there to make that. Porcelain, anything that had to do with utensils and tools that you would have, flatware, all these different things. They were known for that. Now, here's another one. Jewish immigrants. Okay, Jewish immigrants. All those other ones were basically Christians. What about the Jewish immigrants? They were a small group, but significant group. It established like synagogues and businesses all throughout New York. This is why there's such a great population over in New York. They started all these different businesses. They started from nothing and grew it to something. And also in Charleston. So they came in and they knew what to do with starting businesses. They knew how to run businesses. A lot of their extracurricular teachings are around bettering yourself and running businesses, self-sustaining, those type of things. So from food to farming, from language to local politics, these are what the groups brought here. They basically laid the foundation of American culture long before Ellis Island. Oh yeah, Ellis Island. Did they have to go through there? No, there was no Ellis Island. As I said, there were no actual like laws and rules in this sense when it comes to immigration. 1600s, 1700s, nothing. You could come and go as you pleased to some extent. Now, England and European countries, not so much. But here in the Americas, in the United States especially, they wanted more people to come over. The problem was there was a lot of hostility. There was a lot of challenges, whether it was prejudice or there was assimilation problems. Of course, immigration wasn't easy, never is. Early immigrants faced prejudice, cultural clashes, and pressure to assimilate. Now, it's just me, but I think that someone comes into a country, it's a little bit different than it was in older times, but they should assimilate to the culture of that place. If they didn't, and there was a huge influx of, doesn't matter where they're from, all of a sudden the culture would completely shift. The problem is, do you remember, I mentioned this months ago, every single empire that fell is because they lost their core culture. So, let's talk about some of the challenges. Language barriers. Holy cow, there's so many. You got German speakers. You have now Scottish, English, and Irish. They didn't have as much of a problem. But those in Germany, oh, they had tons of problems. Those at France, from France, the Huguenots, had a lot of problems. All those that were coming over, they struggled because of the language barrier. That was the first thing. But, especially in New York, you could probably find someone that spoke your language in the area. You just had to be patient and find them. Most of the times they weren't probably finding you. Now, there were actually groups that were built on, like, the Irish came together, or the Germans came together, and they actually started trying to help the nationalities. Luckily, they all assimilated, but they were trying to help those as they came in off the ships. What another one? Religious discrimination, persecution. So Catholics and Jews were often barred from office. Yeah, that's right, from elected office, and also voting. Yeah, that's really sad. But it was a discrimination that happened so long ago. And a lot of times is because the Europeans that came over did not like the Catholics because they were being persecuted by the Catholics. Or those that were Anglicans from the Anglican Church or the Church of England did not like that either. And so there was a lot of headbutting at the time. Okay, what else? Class prejudice. Okay, that makes sense. Indentured servitude, poor immigrants, they were all looked down by the elite. Yep, that still happens today. Yeah, so if you go to New York, you go walk down the street and you're poor, you look pretty bad to the elite. At the same time, you might just be poor in money, but you're rich in other things. Now, that was totally worthless for me to say. It doesn't matter. Anyways, another one, frontier tension. Now, you had Native Americans and those that were, remember the Scottish and Irish? They settled in the Appalachians. Who were in the Appalachians? The Native Americans. That was Indian Reserve land. And so the elites, the Eastern elites, basically believed that the land was theirs and they wanted to secure it, and they would secure it by force if they needed. So there was a lot of tension there. Even in the 1700s, debates about immigration, loyalty, culture were alive and well. Sounds familiar, right? Yeah, it does. So let's talk about the regulations that were created before 1840s. Okay, so colonial and state controlled. Now this is before the American Revolution and before the United States became a country. Before the federal government took control of immigration, which was actually like in the late 19th century, it was largely managed by the colonies or the individual states. Again, colonies before the American Revolution and individual states after the ratification of the Constitution. So in colonial times, You had chartered companies like the Virginia Company who sponsored settlers. You had religious groups like the Puritans and Quakers, invited like-minded believers to live with them. So again, if you weren't part of those groups, you might be accepted in the area, but it won't be as easy for you. Some colonies passed laws restricting, again, we already talked about Catholics, paupers, which means the poor, or the undesirables. So if you were found undesirable in that colony, you could be kicked out. Now, after independence, after the American Revolution, the U.S. Constitution was signed and ratified between 1787 and 1789. This gave Congress the power over naturalization, but not immigration directly. That's right. It was not immigration directly. States like Massachusetts and New York created laws that regulated ports. If you were coming into their port, they managed the ship arrivals and screened for diseases and poverty. Wait a second. Screening for poverty? I mean, a lot of these people are indentured servants. Well, if you're an indentured servant, you're not classified as the poverty level. You're classified as a indentured servant, and you go work for a person. That's the type of thing that they would allow. So there was no immigration police, no visa system, no passports. Instead, people generally showed up and settled, unless a local law blockaded them or stopped them. So what about naturalization and immigration? Okay, so let's talk about some key points. The U.S. regulated citizenship and naturalization long before it regulated entry and immigration. What? Yeah, there's actually an act in 1790, the Naturalization Act of 1790. Go figure. It allowed only free white persons of good character to become citizens after 2 years, later extending it to 5 years. Wait a second. Wait, I couldn't be a naturalized citizen unless I was 1, free, 2, white, and 3, 1, 2, 3, a good character? How do you tell I'm a good character? Really? Does it because I have some moolah? Or is it because I actually, I don't know. How do you tell it? But you had to have some of these in order to become a citizen. And you had to wait 2 years, and then you had to wait 5 years. Okay. So this excluded enslaved people. There you go. Free blacks. Okay. That's why, because they couldn't become citizens. Not because they were excluded. They didn't have to be naturalized. No. It's because they were not considered full-on citizens. Native Americans. And also many non-Europeans, including when China started sending their people over. Yep, that's same thing. So over time, religious tests faded. Race and ethnicity faded. It remained for some time, but because of debate and people not liking that, it soon faded. No federal immigration policies yet at this point. Before the 1840s, there was no federal immigration quotas. There was no Ellis Island. There was no border patrol. But that would change as immigration surged in the mid-19th century, which is what we're going to be talking about on Wednesday. So coming soon, 3 things I want to tell you about. It's the rise of the nativist movement, also known as Know Nothing. That's right, the Know Nothing Party. Interesting name, but you're going to find out more about it. Growing fears of Catholics and non-English speaking immigrants. And the third one, eventually, the first federal immigration laws came into play. But that's for Wednesday. Now, let's go over a few things that we talked about already, and then we'll wrap it up. So, immigration has always been part of the American story, but it has been a very tense time between welcome newcomers and to find who belonged. So you may not be welcomed as a newcomer, and they basically got to say who belonged. Now, belong to a group, because you could still come. There's no immigration law. You could still come, set up shop. It's all yours. The 17th to 18th century saw immigration come to search out freedoms, survival, and opportunity. They built towns, farms, and churches and left their mark on the American culture. So that's it. Boom. They were some of those that actually made America America. Yet even in a land founded by immigrants and settlers, they faced prejudice, pressure, and policies basically designed to keep them out or keep them separated. Oh, wait a second. Makes me think of segregation. Yes, not of African Americans, not of blacks, but of even Europeans. There was a separation. So it's interesting because at some point, you got to think about this. At some point, you had this separation, and then it slowly went away, and now it's like full on melting pot. Hey, cool. That's where we're at right now. But think of it this way too. There was slavery. Slowly that went away. Civil War, cut in half, gone, bye, goodbye. Then all of a sudden there was representatives, there were senators that were black, like right away, right after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction. We will talk about that next year. But all these things, that's pretty freaking amazing. That is so amazing. So I got a question for you. What stories do you know about your own family's immigration journey? That's right, I want to know about that. Or your communities. So let me know. Put in the comments below, send me an email. I'd love to hear if you know about your family's immigration or your community's immigration to the United States. Please let me know. I have friends from all walks of life and coming from all different places, and even some that came over legally as well as illegally. Now, again, we talked about this. Anyways, I want to hear your story. So please put them in the comments below. Send me an email. Thanks so much for joining us on this Adventure Box podcast, and we will catch you next time. Take care. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.